This is July 28th, 1987.
Yep.
This is Joe, Todd, and Teresa Smith, and interview with Mr. Willard Anderson. Is this Weber's Falls or?
Yes, it's Weber Falls address.
Weber's, okay. And what is your address?
Route 1, Box 785, Weber Falls.
Okay.
That's open to question, though.
Yes. When did you join the service?
Well, I joined the service in August, around the 1st of August, 1939. I was in a CC camp. I spent three enlistments in the CCs, and I went into service out of the CC camp.
Was that here in Oklahoma?
No, that was in Montana.
Montana. What was the number of the camp in Montana?
Well, 29. It was 2901, Camp 1, Belton, Glacier National Park, Montana.
And what did you do in Glacier National Park? What were your duties up there?
Well, I worked as a smoke chaser and also as a truck driver at the time. That was my last duties. And it was about the time, I believe it was about the time that Hitler went into Poland, if I remember right. And everybody was concerned about us getting into a war at that time. And,
why did you join the service? What was the reason?
the main reason? Oh, I've always been a little patriotic. I love this old country.
And where did you join the service?
Pardon?
Where did you join the service?
I joined at Fort Missoula, Montana. That's where I was sworn in. And I got to thinking, well, golly, looked like war in Europe for sure about that time. I figured, well, if I was volunteer, I'd volunteer and go to one of those islands over the Pacific and lead the good life.
Where did you take your basic training?
In Manila, Philippine Islands.
Manila?
Yeah. Yeah, I went right directly overseas. I joined the Army at Fort Missoula, Montana, and they shipped me to Angel Island and San Francisco Bay, and I went overseas on the troop transport U.S. Grant.
Tell me about the trip to the Philippines.
Well, it was the U.S. Grant was an old Army troop transport that was that the United States had captured during World War I. I believe it was the Kaiser's yacht, supposed to be. And by the way, I think it was one of the first ships that was sank in World War II in the Pacific. But it was uneventful going over. It took us 29 days. I remember that. It was an awful slow boat, and we stopped in Hawaii. And
how many men were on the ship?
there was about, I think there was 1,100.
And
We went over as replacements.
replacements?
Yeah.
What about your sleeping quarters of the ship?
Well, it was about like all the troop transports at the time. It was just a iron rail with a piece of canvas over it.
I mean, how many decks did the ship have?
It was either 7 or 8, something
And
like
which
that.
deck were you on?
It was about 5, I think, and then about the 5th deck.
With the bunk stacked?
Yeah.
How many?
There was 5 high.
And where was your bunk?
I think I was the second one up, second or third one up, about in the middle.
Get seasick?
But, oh yeah. I slept most of the time on deck at night.
And
I
tell me
liked
about
it
your
up on
meeting
deck.
book. Go ahead.
Pardon?
Go ahead. What, you going to say something?
I liked the fresh air and lay there and look at the stars at night.
What about the meals? What kind of food do you have on the ship?
Oh, the food was really good for the time. I remember the rations we used to get while I was in a CC camp. It it compared with it.
You want to stop the clock?
No.
Well, you were telling me about the meals on the ship.
Oh, it was fairly good rations, and I think it was about is better, just as good or better than we had while I was in a CC camp. Of course, there wasn't as many green vegetables or anything, things like that, fresh fruit, but there was plenty of canned fruit and
What kind
vegetables.
of meat did you have on the ship?
Gosh, it's so hard to remember, and I don't think we had any fresh meat, to tell you the truth. I don't remember any fresh meat. Of course, there's preserved meat.
What kind of meat was it? What kind of preserved meat did you have?
Oh, like bacon and ham and spam and corned beef and things of that sort.
What'd you do in the day for recreation? What'd you do every day on the ship?
Every day?
Yeah.
Calisthenics, well, one thing. That is a regular item, and of course we had different classes we had to attend to, regular, where they taught different things pertaining to combat and what have you.
Would you describe your average day on the ship? From the time you got up to the time you went to bed, what'd you do?
Oh, we had reveille in the morning.
What time?
6 o'clock, I believe it was, and we'd do calisthenics for a half hour, and then we had our breakfast, and if I remember right, and then we had a couple of classes, and then of course then we had some idle time. We'd do what we wanted. And that is, we wasn't on KP or something like that, kitchen police or extra duty or one of the cleaning details. Of course, there was plenty of that. And in the evenings, we'd usually have a movie. But
And then what time were lights out, or when did you retreat?
retreat is 11 o'clock. They played taps 11 o'clock, I remember.
And you landed in Manila?
Yeah, the first thing we coming through the streets, Manila. I forget the streets there that they call. They had a big sea battle there during World War II, anyhow. But the first thing we really reception that we really got was our planes meeting the ship, and all the different squadrons that we was assigned to and everything come out and meet the ship, and they flew over.
Now, were you Army Air Corps?
Yeah. I remember the 2nd Observation Squadron, and I have pictures of them yet. And they met the ship, and of course, then we docked in Manila, and they had the bands out playing for us and everything, and of course, then we shipped off to the different places we were assigned, like the boys in the 60th Coast Artillery out of Craigdora that they shipped out there as replacements, and I went to Nichols Field there in the edge of Manila.
How'd you travel to Nichols Field?
They had a regular Army truck.
By truck?
Yeah.
Did you see much of Manila at that time?
No, outside of Dewey Boulevard, going down Dewey Boulevard, I remember looking out the back of the truck and seeing all the mast of the old ships that was sank out there during the War of 1898 when Dewey was
Oh, they
over
were
there.
still there then.
Yeah, they're still there yet. Even yet, you can see them. And I thought that was pretty interesting. They'd been there so long. But of course, Manila Hotel's right off of Dewey Boulevard. It's a big, beautiful hotel. And when we went through Pass I, it's a little barrio right on the outside of Manila, and that was the main barrio to where Nichols Field was at the time.
Describe your your basic training.
Basic training was in conjunction with a regular squadron. We just had a squad of men, and they went through extensive training separate from the squadron, you know, for a specified length of time. I think we spent 4 months having. We had book work and of course close order drill and things of this sort.
What was
and that's how we was trained. Now I never had any formal basic training whatsoever. None of the boys did at that time, and that's what we got.
And what was to be your job in the Air Corps?
I was a mechanic, Air Force engine mechanic.
On what type of engines?
Well, radial mostly. Our 1840D radial engine, and of course I was just private at the time, you know. We had our regular setup. We had crew chief was usually a staff sergeant or a tech sergeant, and a corporal, and 2 enlisted men on each plane, taking care of each airplane for maintenance. And
what airplane did you work on?
the first one was C-46, or let me see, is O-46, yeah, O-46 observation plane, O-46C, and it was a high wing observation plane. Of course, it's a same type of airplane that first went to the boat up there, but really, I don't know what happened to them after the first day of the war. I never seen them anymore. I guess they got them all on the ground. The Japanese did. But the old, we had the airplanes that we had were antiques. We had some old 19s and old. It was a biplane. It looked something like these World War I deals.
How long did your basic last at Nichols Field?
I think it was 4 months
4 months.
before I got out of what you would consider basic training there at Nichols
Okay.
Field.
Would you give me a quick description of Nichols Field? The areas you stayed in, the runways, just.
Well, there was just a small airfield on the edge of town, and there was 2 runways, as I remember, running diagonally to each other, and there was 3 hangars, and of course there was the different squadron barracks there. I think there was areas where they housed the squadrons. I think there was 3 different areas at that time. Of course, they made it bigger during the war. The Japanese made it bigger too. But as it was when I first went over there, wasn't a very big place.
No, you say it was on the outskirts of Manila?
Yes.
Was it what, east, west, north?
It was south and east.
South and east.
Right around the edge of Manila Bay, south of Manila.
What were your main duties from the time you joined the Army up until Pearl Harbor? What'd you do in that period?
I was an engine mechanic mostly.
So you spent all the time at
I
Nichols
spent
Field?
all my time overhauling engines.
Was that at Nichols Field?
No, I was transferred out of Nichols Field. The whole squadron was transferred to Clark Field after I was there for about 5 months, and they transferred me over into another squadron that they called the tow target squadron, and we had the old B-10 bombers, and the one we had 3 planes in this little tow target detachment that I was in, and we pulled these big sock targets for the pursuit planes to get their target practice in on. See, that's what they call us, a tow target squadron.
And what kind of airplane?
And I was on detached service, B-10.
B-10. No, I'm not familiar with the B-10.
Well, the B-10, I have plenty of pictures of it.
Right. How does it compare to B-17?
Oh, it was a little small twin-engine plane, and a squadron of them back in 1938, I think, flew around the world, and they got an Army Air Force did a squadron of them. I think it was about 6 planes, and they got a lot of publicity about that time. But there was a mid-wing monoplane, twin-engine, and had a crew of 3.
Would you compare Clark Field to Nichols Field? How do the 2 fields compare?
Well, Clark Field was about 60 miles north of Nichols Field, and it was a much larger airfield. It was on the edge of a big military reservation they called Fort Stotzenberg, and the cavalry was that was a cavalry base, 26 Cavalry. In fact, it was the only horse cavalry left in the United States Army, I believe, was stationed there. And Clark Field was the airfield that was stationed right on the edge of this big military reservation. And it's a much bigger airfield than Nichols Field, and it's more centrally located, right in the heart of Luzon.
Is Luzon a big island?
Luzon's the largest island out of 7,000. There's 7,000 islands in the Philippines.
Now, you said that you were towing the targets. How were they shooting the targets? What were they using to shoot the targets?
Oh, there's your pursuit planes usually. Pursuit planes, and sometimes anti-aircraft under certain conditions.
And how long was the tow chain that you were towing these targets?
Oh, if I remember right, some of them was 1,000 feet long, maybe up to 2,000 on some of the anti-aircraft, but they was using, of course, machine guns and stuff on the anti-aircraft.
And how high were you flying when you were towing the targets?
I don't remember right offhand. It was, maybe 1,000 to 3,000 feet, probably.
Okay.
Maybe. Couldn't be much more than that. Couldn't really do it and be safe.
Yeah. Pearl Harbor.
Well, the day.
Of course, there it was December 8th, wasn't it?
Yes, we was on the other side of the international date line. It was December 8th was us.
Did you have any idea the Japanese expansion that they were building up?
Oh yeah, we was on alert. We had our planes dispersed at Clark Field, and the plane that I had was we had it out in a golf course. Of course, we had a golf course there, and on the edge of Clark Field, and they had a squadron of planes around on this golf course, and revetments built up, and of course we had our B trenches dug next to the plane, and everything like that. So we was on alert, and of course the morning of December 8th, it was let me see, it was Monday morning where we was at. Monday morning, I'm pretty sure. But there was, my plane was right by a swimming pool, and there was a Chinese tailor, had a tailor shop right there, and then the 28th Bombardment Squadron Barracks was right across the road from that, and then they had a post exchange right next to that. And I was a crew chief. I'd been promoted to crew chief in this plane, and I was sitting in the Monday morning. I got into the cockpit, and I was running the engines up. It was a twin-engine plane, and I checked all the instruments and everything out, and I had on the earphones, and I had the radio tuned into Hawaii. I was listening to some music, and I heard what they's going on there in Hawaii. Man, I'm telling you, kind of sent me back.
So you were the first one to hear the news then?
Well, I think the rest of them heard about the same time.
What was your reaction when you heard that?
Oh, just stunned. Really stunned to work. And I sat there and I turned the radio off, and I seen the guys running across the airfield. I knew that they had been alarmed over it. And about that time I looked up and I could see a couple of squadrons of planes coming in. So that's first I heard about it, first I realized what was going on. And I climbed out of that cockpit and jumped in the first trench. It was down, we dug right down beside the plane there. And
so you knew they were Japanese planes?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was no doubt in my mind. I was about the first guy in the trench, I know that. And the first pass they made, they strafed. This one bunch of planes, they strafed. There was no bombs in that first pass. About that time, everybody was heading for trenches after that first strafing job. Of course, I was already in. Then the second bunch of planes coming, the bombs started coming in. And I got the plane that I had just got out of. And this trench fell in on us. I was underneath them. I remember crawling out of one end of this trench, and I ran as fast as I could, and I jumped in this dry swimming pool, the cement swimming pool. And that was a wrong thing to do. I found that out right quick. Because they'd come back and they started strafing again, and those bullets going around that swimming pool like a bunch of bees. So I got out of there, got into another trench, and the bomb hit in the apex of it and killed everybody in it. It was right behind this Chinese tailor shop I was telling you about. Except the two men on the ends. I was on the one end, and there was another guy on the other end. Of course, they was built like this at a V, so that you couldn't strafe, go down for protection. So.
What saved the two men on the end?
I don't know, because the bomb hit off the apex of that darn thing, and I don't see any reason. But I remember this. He wasn't exactly a friend of mine, but he was an acquaintance of mine. He was on the other end there. We got out, and we lasted through the raid anyhow, and we went over, and of course the 28th Bombardment Squadron, their barracks was all gone, and the post exchange is all gone, and the boys there was a lot of them dead in the post exchange there. They'd been in there.
How long did the raid last?
Oh, the first raid was about an hour and 20 minutes, I imagine, all of it.
Now, how were the planes arranged in the runway?
Our planes?
Yeah.
There wasn't any in front of the.
They ordered it in some type of formation on the ground. The airplanes.
No, our planes were all dispersed. But the Japanese got most of them all right, but they had to hunt for them to get them. They wasn't lined up like there was in Hawaii or anything.
Where were the bombs kept? The ammunition for the guns kept?
It was all of our ammunition dump and all of our bombs was kept on the far end of the field, in a jungle off the far end of the field, and they never hit it. It was safe.
How many
But
airplanes?
they did get, there was 2 flights of B-17s come in during the raid. One of them landed during the raid, in fact. He was out of gas. And I think there was 6 or 7 of them got hit. They saved 1 or 2 of them by sending them off to a little airfield south of us. And I think they saved 6 B-17s out of the next bunch that come in. They just left Hawaii and they just landed in Clark Field. So I think we had about 8 or 9 possibly B-17s left after the first raid there.
How many airplanes do you have in the field?
We had about 60, 65, something like that. But most of them was old, outdated things. Was just
Were they all destroyed?
were just useless.
Were they all destroyed by the Japanese?
Nearly all of them was destroyed that first day by the Japanese. And we had some P-40s that made it through, and we had a couple Navy amphibians there that made it through all right, and some B-17s. All told, I don't imagine it was over 18 or 20 at the very most serviceable airplanes when it was done.
After the raid, what'd you do?
Well, our commanding officer got us all together and said, well, we're going to the jungle. Bivouacked out in the jungle as far as we could, out around the airfield, to stay close, but we were, make it hard in case they came back. And there wasn't much we could do until they landed. They landed at Lingayen, I think, about a week and a half later.
Where's Lingayen?
It was just north of us, about 50 miles of Japanese troop ships.
And what'd you do during that week?
We're just cleaning up after those raids and fighting the next raids off. Of course, they raided us about 3 or 4 times a day.
They did?
Yeah.
How'd you fight the raids off?
Well, machine guns, anything we can grab a hold of, usually. And I remember that, well, this was at Fort Stotzenberg. That was right at Clark Field there too. They sent the cavalry as the first ones out. Of course, when they landed at Lingayen, we had some of our B-17s take off, and we bombed the Jap troop ships up in Lingayen when they come in, I believe. And then the cavalry and the Philippine Scouts, a couple of regiments of Philippine Scouts and stuff went up to fight them off when they landed. And then they revealed what the strategy was going to be with us. They told us all that we were going to go back to prepared positions on Bataan. That's the only way we could defend the island at all, and it was actually.
So how'd you travel from there to Bataan?
Well, we went by truck, but we fought a delay in action. You see, Clark Field was just not too far from Lingayen Gulf, where the Japanese landed. And Bataan was way south of there. It's a little old peninsula that sticks out on one edge of Manila Bay. Commands the entrance to the bay where all those ships come by there. And of course, Corregidor sits right at the entrance too. They're big guns, and so that protected the entrance to Manila Bay. Well, off on the other side of the peninsula was a little bay they call Subic Bay. I believe our Navy has a base there yet. And And the distance across there is a very short distance across there, so it was pretty easily defended. And it was made it compact where we had all of our best defense as far as the guns and everything's concerned in one place, or we really do the most damage.
So when did you move to Bataan?
Well, I'm not sure of the dates, what the dates was. It was in, let's see, sometime in January. It's about the middle of January.
So in about 2 weeks.
But we fought a delay in action going down. We went to San Fernando first, and of course, the way Manila Bay is, Manila's on one side, Bataan's on the other side, and all the people from Manila had to come out around this little town called San Fernando to get back down by land down to Bataan, see. And of course, that's San Fernando, that town is strategic because everything coming from the north came through there too. So we was there for quite some time till they told us to fall back to the first line, his Orion Bigak line. I'm not sure about we had about 3 different lines that we used there on Bataan where we fought the Japanese off, but I think it was Orion Bigak. And let me see, we fought for 4 months. Fought them off for 4 months.
What did you do during those 4 months? What?
Of course, after they shut down all the planes, they put me as a replacement in the infantry. You know, I never had any formal infantry training.
What did they tell you to do in the infantry?
Well, just I'll tell you the thing, how things led up. That's the best way I can describe it. Of course, I had the line pretty well manned. They held them off real good, the Japanese, and we had our beach defenses all set in. Of course, we had several battles around the beach. The Battle of the Points, Quinine Point, and where the Air Force boys and the Navy boys, they darn as much infantry guys you ever saw. But they fought them off at least 3 or 4 different places at 2 different times that I know of on the Battle of the Points there, the Japanese, where they tried to get around and infiltrate our lines. And we had one collecting point for the troops. It was right in the center above Maravillas there, where they send the replacements out where they was needed. And of course, one of the times they sent me up on the edge of Mount Maravillas up there because the whole western side of this mountain on the top was bare. There was no trees or anything. There's a good landing place for parachute troops to come in. So they had us up there in the edge of the jungle overlooking this open space, you know, in case of paratroopers, Japanese paratroopers. But it never developed. But these battle points, you know, down along the beach, it did. Boy, they forever trying to infiltrate our lines down there, so they took us down there, and we fought several battles down there. And the worst thing I can think of is that happened to us at that time was trying to get something to eat and ammunition. We run out of ammunition and food. And malaria was getting a lot of the guys. I know it did me at one time. I come down with malaria, and man, I was sick. And we had 2 hospitals on Bataan, what we call Hospital 1, Hospital 2. One was at Cabin Airfield, right directly opposite of Corregidor, and the other one's up the road about 15 miles.
So what were you eating there toward the end? What kind of food did you have?
Well, we had, it was kind of hard to say just what we could get, you know. We had a few coconuts on the island, we had bananas, scrounge up bananas, and of course they had what the rations that we took down on Bataan with us when we come in, but we never had enough to last 4 months, rations for any 4 months. I doubt if we had rations for a month when we went down there.
Did you think you could hold the Japanese off?
Pardon?
Did you think you could hold the Japanese off on Bataan?
Well, what we was hoping for was reinforcements right from the start, but during the worst part of the fight, as far as Bataan was concerned, is when I went up to him. It was long in February, and when the fighting was worse there, I read a communique when I was sitting on a tree, and this communique said that told were two United States divisions that landed in Africa, and I knew that there was no hope for us then. We was being abandoned. That's, I believe, you remember when the troops landed in Africa about that time. But we had always been hoping for troops, but we was 10,000 miles behind by ocean from any reinforcements. The whole Japanese Navy and everything else. It's kind of an impossible deal. And of course, MacArthur, the president, ordered him to Australia, and we knew there wasn't any hope after that. So everybody is pretty much on their own. We just had to fight her out. But the food, we did run out of food and ammunition and things like that. And I remember eating the last of the cavalry horses, by the way, 26 cavalry horses. And that was the last meat that we had. And I remember meat that we got from Craigador had been frozen in those tunnels over there, and it was the U.S. Department of Agriculture stamp on it in 1908. Shipped up there and froze in those tunnels well, some of it was from Australia.
You eat that too?
Their meat was meat from animals that was killed before I was born. And it seems funny eating something like that, but it was the truth. And I was really sick, malaria, and they put me in this hospital just shortly. And I was so sick I can't tell you too much about it. Really, you know what cerebral malaria is like. It's a spinal deal, and it goes up and affects your head, affects your thinking, your eyes will roll, you know, most horrible headaches and fevers you ever had in your life. And that was the day of the surrender. Let me see, the commanding officer's name is Jones. Was it Jones? General. No, it's Jones or something like that. General King, that's right, you're right. General King, day of surrender. Well, I was in this hospital at the edge of Cabin Field, I think it's Hospital 1. And they rousted everybody out that could walk out on the edge of the airfield there. And of course, that wasn't very far from Marvelis, and most of the Japanese was gathering all the Americans up that was down below Marvelis in through there and getting them all in one spot. And they had us out there on this airfield at Marvelis, or Cabin Field, that was the name of the airfield. They lined us up out there, and I noticed the Japanese set their artillery up on one edge of this field. And what they done, they started shelling Craigador. Craigador hadn't surrendered yet. and thinking that Corregidor wouldn't fire back as long as they had us Americans out there, see, on the airfield. Well, they figured wrong. You got their wires crossed. Corregidor did fire back. They cut loose those 12-inch mortar they had over in Corregidor, and you know, that's a pretty big gun. Dig a hole was big enough to put this trailer in when it hit, when the shells hit. I remember the darn thing, the old ground would start shaking and dirt would fill the air, and it'd be the most heart-rending boom you ever heard in your life when things come in. Well, this first one hit, and as much as I remember of it, my helmet went rolling across that darn airfield, and picked it up, and you couldn't have held tomatoes. It was one of those old type helmets, you know, that had like the British had. It broke chin strap. And I got a big gash on this side of my head, and it killed 8 or 10 of the fellows, and there must have been about 27 or 28 of them wounded on that deal. And that was the day of that was actually, no, a day after the surrender, I think. The day after King's surrender. And they're pretty close. I couldn't be just positive.
What damage did they do the Japanese artillery?
Oh, it took out one gun entirely. One of them, and I know it took out. Boy, that thing was just... And probably 2 or 3 more of them. There was a battery in there. And so they took us out about 4 or 5 miles. They marched us about 4 or 5 miles on down to the main road going out towards Pilar, the ones that could walk. And they had a place down there where they made us wait until a lot of the other Americans caught up, and they was all in such, they was in bad shape physically. You know, they was run down from no food or different diseases they had. And that's how that march started out, and that's one reason that so many of the boys died on it. Their physical condition when it started was so bad. Of course, they fought for 4 or 5 months there.
Now, you still have malaria at this time?
Yeah, I had it. I was in the hospital. And it was about, we was there about 2 or 3 days at this place where we was gathered there, and my head started to swell up, and by God, it was just like a doggone basketball. And it got infected, and that's the way I started out that March. I was in bad shape. But it took about 2 weeks. Could you excuse me just a minute? Sure. I was telling you about. And around this side of the bay is Manila. And by the way, here's me.
That's you?
That's me. When I was recaptured, when I was repatriated. I was in Bilibad Prison.
You lost quite a bit of weight.
Yeah, and I got another one here. The same guy took. Oh, here it is. The boys that was with me out of Bilibad.
Oh, the top picture?
Yeah, in the top picture there.
Are you in that photograph?
No, not this one here. That was me on the stretcher down there.
Before the surrender, how were the Japanese attacking Bataan? You said they came in by sea. Were they using artillery against you all?
Pardon?
Before the surrender, Were the Japanese, besides trying to invade from the sea, were they attacking Bataan with artillery?
Oh yeah, yeah. Their Air Force and artillery, yeah, all the time. Yeah, it was going on. That was a constant thing. And bombing.
What protection did you have from
They
them?
bomb and strafe everything that moved.
What kind of protection did you have from the bombs?
Well, jungle's the best protection we had. Getting in the jungle and making ourselves obscure. But it was just a constant thing, day and night. Even they had old washing machine Charlie every night flying over us.
What's washing machine Charlie?
And one of their observation planes flying at night, trying to pick out campfires and what have you, for concentrations were possibly. Yeah.
When the word came in to surrender, what were your thoughts when you first got the word to surrender?
I didn't know what to think. I just wondered what now. It wasn't any place to go, really. Some of the boys swam to Corregidor, tried to swim to Corregidor. There's a lot of them lost on that. But even that, there was no future to that, even as far as going over there is concerned. And getting out of Bataan was practically impossible, too, to get with the guerrillas or anything like that, because the line was so short that you had to go through, and the entire Japanese army was up there, 400,000 troops. Getting through something like that is just practically impossible. And then the ocean, there had nothing to go, no way to go.
When you first saw a Japanese soldier, what did you think?
When I first saw him, you mean after his surrender?
Yep, when you first saw a Japanese soldier, what was your reaction?
My first thought of, we got to fight something like this. It's just.
So tell me about the march. What happened?
Well, that was something else.
Does it bother you to talk about it?
No, it don't really bother me any to talk about it, but it was horrible. I'll just put it that way. Walking down this road and seeing our boys laying in the ditch, bayoneted and beaten to death, and I know I took a lot of beatings myself, but there was 7,000 troops lost on that march.
Why were you beaten?
Anything, they didn't have to have a reason, really.
What did they beat you with?
Usually they're rifle butts, or they'd kick your rifle butts, or they'd pick up a club, or most of the time it was for taking something from a Filipino and offer a little, maybe a little ball of rice or something, or offer you a little bit of water on the march when you was thirsty, and just little things like that's what they beat you for. And like my friend Delbert Tilton, one that I was in a CC camp with, joined the army with. I'll tell you about that. It was about 10 miles south of San Fernando. He was sick and he dropped behind us, and he fell out to get a drink of water. What happened? And the Japanese grabbed him, and this Japanese officer wanted to make a example out of him, and they made us all watch, and they made him dig his own grave, and they made him kneel down at the end of this thing. This Japanese officer took the sword and chopped his head off, and he did a flip-flop into this trench where he come down on his feet like that. And you could see his heartbeat coming right out of his neck like that, where his heart just died. And that's something that'll live with me as long as I live.
And he stopped for drinking water?
Drink of water. And then they took this Japanese, took this Filipino and just with a club and just beat him senseless. But I don't think they killed the Filipino. But they was hard on the Filipinos too. But it was just, that's just an example, and that's the thing that's lived with me. And one reason I never wanted to go home in Montana, to tell you the truth. The boys that I joined with all died on that march, every one of them. And their folks are still living there. Their folks, and they never came back, and I did.
Were there Filipinos in the march with you?
Oh yes. A lot of the people back here don't realize it, but the Filipinos was in they was in the American Army just like we were. They were American soldiers, and they fought. The Philippine Scouts was an American outfit. It was all Filipino soldiers with American officers.
Why? How did you survive the march?
I was in. I'll tell you, I figured that out afterwards. I was in better shape than 3/4 the guys were to start with. Even
with malaria.
Even with the malaria, and I was wounded too. I was in better shape. I was in first class shape. And I attribute that to coming out of it. But then I just about didn't make it because after we first got into prison camp, there's so many died that we'd carry out maybe 120 or 130 every morning dead, and we'd put them in blankets in a pole, and the Japanese would have us bury them. And it was a wet season up there, and the graves were about 12, 15 foot square. They'd dig out a big hole in the ground, and of course we'd have to lay them out there, and the holes was full of water, so we'd have to hold the bodies down at poles. And then most of them had died of beriberi, same thing I got right now. And if you know what it is, your ankles will swell up, and the muscles in your feet will feel like they're tearing apart, and the water will build up in them, and then build up in their legs and hips, and finally in their stomach, and then they get up in their chest, and they just drown in their own fluids. That's what had happened, and they'd have what they'd call congestive heart failure. And a lot of these boys would be they wouldn't be dead, they'd be breathing yet. And you had to hold them down with a pole, and you can see the bubbles coming up. But then they'd never lived. And I think beriberi killed more guys than any one disease that there was.
Are those graves still there? Or they moved after that?
I think they moved most of the graves out of there to the main one down in Manila. And as I understand it, that's the most beautiful military cemetery in the world now, too.
And how long did the march last?
About 2 weeks before, from 2 to 3 weeks before they was all up there.
And from Bataan to where?
Bataan to Camp O'Donnell was a camp, and by the way, that was the worst. That was the worst prisoner of war camp of World War II.
And how far is that? How many miles?
By miles, I'd say about 120 miles, but you have to realize that it was in the season of the year where it was from anywhere from 110 to 120 degrees all the time, and it was hot, and I know of the different things, the diseases, tropical diseases and diseases, malnutrition that the boys developed. All that was practically the worst. That's a cause of beriberi, by the way, is malnutrition, lack of it. Funny thing is the things that'll happen to you for the lack of the right things to eat. You'll go blind, your skin will fall off, you'll lose your fingernails, your hair will fall out, your ankles will swell up, and just everything. You'll just fall to pieces. But your stomach and intestines become scar tissue, and the things that you do eat, your body won't absorb the vitamins out of it, and that just causes further complications. And this is the complications that I have right now, to tell you the truth about it, because my body won't absorb vitamins and the things that I do eat. I'll get fat and all that, but it'll look healthy, but the looks isn't what counts. It's the things that your body will utilize is what counts. And but I had mebic dysentery. I had mebic and bacillary dysentery, both real bad. I just practically died with it. And pellagra, I turned yellow, and I'd lose my skin, and my eyeballs would be yellow. And there's diseases of the liver. And these are kind of diseases that affected most of the boys that was over there, and I don't know any of them that came back that it hasn't been that way with. Even Philip Bluebird, who you met.
Yeah.
I believe he was in a wheelchair when you met him.
He was in bad shape when I first met him.
But
In fact, I couldn't interview him.
carcinoma, he had carcinoma in his nerve endings, and from beriberi, same thing.
Would you give me a description of Camp O'Donnell?
Camp O'Donnell was built for the Philippine government for their constabulary, their own soldiers. It was an old training camp, and it was built out of reeds and bamboo poles and reeds. It was on stilts, and it's where the Philippine Army was stationed way back in the 30s when they was training,
How big was Camp O'Donnell?
Camp O'Donnell was, I imagine they had about 150 of these barrack-sized barracks, but
how big were the barracks?
Oh, I'd say they was 100 feet long by about 20 feet wide.
And how many men?
They had about 150 of them. And if I remember right, they only had one water spigot for the whole camp, and everybody had to line up to get to drinking water. And the toilets was latrines that we had to dig right inside the camp, and that was the reason for so much dysentery, the flies and stuff getting to it, and so many of the boys got dysentery and died. But how I got out of this camp, I had beriberi and dysentery. I got to be where I was all right on that malaria bit, but I had this beriberi. I was swollen up, and my feet was aching, and I knew that they was going to carry me out just like they did some of these others. And about this time, the Japanese said that wanted a detail to go down on Bataan to get out some of these trucks that we'd sabotaged, and they wanted those trucks out. They were going to pull them into Manila and a compound down there and get a bunch of Americans to work on them and fix them up so they could use them, see, and that was their idea. And they wanted some volunteers for this, and I knew if I stayed in that Camp O'Donnell, and I was going to be dead, so I went ahead and volunteered for it. They took us down to a compound in San Fernando, and we had one good truck, and a big long old rope off a ship, a darn hawser rope. I think it's about that big around. And we'd go down to Bataan, we'd hook on about 6 or 8 of these old cars, and this one was running, and we'd drag the rest of them, and we'd get in and steer them out, you know, pull them down the highway and around where they could come and get them. San Fernando was about 60 miles, 60, 70 miles.
Did they drive you to Bataan?
Pardon?
Did you ride to Bataan that time?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Japanese took you down there?
Yeah, they took us down there. And I worked about 3 or 4 weeks on this detail, and I figured right, it was a good deal because I got some extra food. Filipinos and stuff along the way to hand me extra food, and I got built up again, whereas I could motate a little bit again and get around, and so it's the best thing. I'd have been gone if I'd have stayed at O'Donnell, and but then I come down with malaria again, and Japanese took me over to a doctor in a hospital over there in San Fernando, and had that darn cerebral malaria. Now, if I remember right, I was there for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I just about died with it. And the Filipino doctor come in there, and he had some of this Ataburn. It's a yellow pill. It's supposed to be good for malaria. And I remember he gave me some of that. And I began to get a little better. And the minute I began to get better, well, I was looking for a way to get away from that because the guerrillas was pretty close to there, and I seen my chance, and I got out of there and got back with the guerrillas. And this one Filipino family I was staying with, they hid me out for about a week and a half, and I only got to see this one bunch of guerrillas, I guess 1 or 2 days while I was there. But this Filipino, his cousins or some of his relatives, they turned me into the Japanese. They said I was at this house. And the Japanese come down there and they got me. And I spent about a week and a half with my hands tied to my ankles, and I was bare naked. They had a pole run between my legs. It was right on right in front of the guardhouse. Japanese guardhouse in one of the biggest towns in central Luzon, San Fernando. And they wanted to make an example of it, I guess, what they had in mind, because there was a lot of traffic going up and down this highway right in front of us, Filipinos, and they'd make those Filipinos come over there and slap me or hit me, when they walked by. Just trying to get on the good side of the Filipinos or something. But they beat on me every day for must have been a week or 2 out there, and finally one of them took pity on me and took me back in, put me in a truck, and they took me down to Bilibad Prison in Manila. And that was a hospital. By the way, Bilibad was a hospital for all of the prisoners of war camps in the Pacific. And that was supposed to be the hospital. But getting to go to a hospital in a prisoner of war camp and the Japanese is the last thing you want to do, because it's just like getting a death sentence. Because that's the first thing they do, you go on half rations, and if they weren't, and nobody in very good shape, and anybody go on half rations, whether they're sick, they're gone, just like getting a death sentence. So being put in the hospital is sure something that is not to be desired. But anyhow, I went on half rations. I got feeling better in there, and I thought maybe this would work again. It worked once when they took me out on this detail out to Bataan. I'd get on this detail down Port Area. where they had these trucks and they was fixing them up. They'd pull them down there from up there where we'd take them at San Fernando. This was the end point, you know, and they'd get to work on them down there and fix them up. And maybe I'd get a little extra food in there. I was sick, anyhow. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I went down there and I worked about 2 weeks in this motor pool fixing these trucks up, getting the motors running and everything. And the Japanese come over there and they wanted 20 of us to go over there and unload a ship. Port area. They had the docks right there, and they had this old ship that was pulled in there, and the hole was filled with rice. We had to get down in this hole, you know, and shovel rice in the bags, and fill these bags, of course, and then they'd lift them out, and there's dust. You couldn't see nothing. You had to put a rag around your face. That's the only way to keep the dust out of your lungs. And but I did get to steal a little extra rice out of that. I cut my canteen in two, my water canteen in two, and where it was two halves, and I'd fill it up full of that rice, you know, and stick it back together and stick it in my case, you know, like the old army canteens were. And I'd pack it out. And when we'd go in at night, I'd have it full of rice. And so I did get a little extra food and stuff, but all that dust and stuff affected my lungs bad that I caught pneumonia when I was down there, among other things. Back to Bilibad again. Pneumonia on top of everything else. Just coughing up blood. Bad shape there. And I wasn't in Bilibad very long. I was still sick yet. And I don't know what they had done. They took us out. I was in one of the bunch that was, they was shipping a bunch through to Japan about that time, making up different details to go to Japan. They was bringing most of them from Cabana to Juan. That's another prison camp up in central Luzon, not too far from Camp O'Donnell, by the way. And so they took me out at Bilibad and they took me to Cabana to Juan. I was up there on the farm. And they had what they called a zero ward up there, and hospital, and that was the same deal.
What's a zero ward?
Zero ward, that's where they take you to die. Hospital, that's the zero ward. And they was taking guys out of there just like there was Camp O'Donnell and burying them. And I finally got them to let me out of there and go back in the main compound of the rest of the boys, and went out to work on the farm. They had the farm out there, raising vegetables. Of course, they wouldn't let us have any of the vegetables. They had to have it for the Japanese. But I did get out and get a little exercise and got a little air, and you know, it was a morale booster. And they fixed up, eventually they called us all in one morning and they wanted us to, our commanders to make out a list of men for a detail to Japan. Taking a bunch out to Japan. The fact is, they was taking a lot of different groups through Japan at that time, the American prisoners. So I went out with this group to Bilibad, and of course they took us to Bilibad again, and when I got down there in Bilibad, I was sick again. And of course the Japanese doctors looked at all the boys all over, and the ones they wanted they took, and the ones they didn't want they didn't, and I was in poor health. Out I went.
Do you recall the date, approximate date?
The date? This was in fall of '43, I think. I couldn't tell you the exact date.
Right, I just meant.
Fall of 1943.
And you were back at Bilibad.
Yeah.
When did
But
they
they,
build the ship? What's the name of the ship?
The Orioku Maru, that was in December of '44. That was the last ship out.
December of '44. That's about right, yeah.
Is that when you left?
I remember that detail going through.
Oh,
I was in Bilibad then. See, they all come through Bilibad. Every one of them.
Right.
Every one of them on these ships, if they loaded these ships, they'd come through. The detail comes through Bilibad.
Right.
And December, they were. I think that was the last one to come through. If I remember right, because the Americans was bombing again at that time.
What was the security at these camps? How did the Japanese secure?
Oh, that was the most secure thing. That's the most simple thing you ever heard of. They had what they called blood brothers. One man foul up, they put everybody in squads of 10 men. One man foul up, he'd shoot the other 9. So, yeah, if you fouled up, you ain't gonna have the
What do you
nine of your friends killed over you on
What do
your
you mean foul
conscience.
up? What would you do to foul up?
Try to escape, go over the hill. You see
If
any?
you escaped, the other 9 were executed.
Yeah, your best friends. That happened too. That's their security. Of course, the Japanese. Now, I want to explain this. That a lot of people don't realize this. That they never signed no Geneva Convention for prisoners of war. At that time, during World War II, when World War II broke out, they had what they called the Bushido Code, and they had some samurai. You heard of the samurai warriors and all this stuff? Well, they had what they called the Bushido Code, and that's the code they went by.
What is that code? What is it?
That means you don't surrender, for one thing. They'll kill you if you do, even their own people. So it's the strictest code you ever saw in your life, and they don't bother chopping each other's heads off either. And they're ranked one rank above another one. Everybody's looking down the next guy's throat. And everybody's got to shape up, you know. And that's a study all on its own, but they didn't recognize any Geneva Convention or anything like that.
Was there a chain of command among the prisoners? Like, was there a leader of all the prisoners?
No. There was a Commander Tawan, the Marine Corps commandant, the 4th Marines that come down from Shanghai, China, and went to Corregidor, was in command at Commander Tawan, and the Navy, they had some Navy officers in command at Bilibad, but they weren't really, they didn't show, they didn't exercise any authority whatsoever.
What about the chain of command among the Japanese, among the guards?
Oh, rigid. It's really rigid.
At the different camps, what was the rank of the Japanese that controlled the prison camp?
Oh, captain. Usually about the equivalent of our captain.
Army captain?
Yeah. But really the most the cruelest Japanese, I tell you, was most of them was the sergeants.
Why?
The sergeants.
Why? Why were they more cruel?
Well, the way their army set up, they get the officers looking down their throat, and I mean, the ones underneath them too. And
what would the sergeants do that the officers wouldn't do?
oh, it's hard to describe. When the officers out of sight, they really got tough then.
What, physical discipline?
And sometimes when the officers around, they wouldn't bother us, you know. The minute those officers disappeared, boy, those sergeants are really cracked down. I'll give you an example. They had nicknames for them. They had one of them they called the White Angel, another one the Feather Merchant, and we had little nicknames for them. But they was the most cruel people you ever saw in your life.
What would they do to you? What?
They'd beat on you.
What
Beat you
would
over
they
the head.
What would they use to beat on?
Cuda. They'd make you push the truck. Get out, just for no reason at all. they'd make two Americans stand up to each other and just slap each other, hit each other just hard as they could for a half hour at a time, just one after another, punishing each other, and then they stand back there and laugh at you. And if you didn't hit hard enough, they'd come up and help them out a little. Just things like that. Just senseless things. And oh yeah, I remember. Well, I give you an example how cruel they were. That what happened at what's that little island I was telling you about, Virginia? About Palawan, island of Palawan. Just as about the time that last ship that she's talking about went out. They had a bunch of, I think about 300 Americans down there in this little island of Palawan, building a little old airfield. And they dug a big air raid shelter out one end of this airstrip. And that's about the time the Americans started bombing again. Halsey and his fleet was coming back in. Well, these Navy planes come back in bombing and strafing. And these 300 Americans, they run them down this air raid shelter, and there was only one entrance to it, and they threw 3 or 4 barrels of gas on that thing and set it afire and killed them all, burned to death. That happened along in December of '44. I think it killed over 250 of them. I can't be sure about the numbers, but there's a few of them that came through Bilibad and told us about it, what had happened. It got away. And cruel things like that, you know. I never could understand them.
Would you describe
pointless things?
Yeah. Would you describe your average day in the prison camp? What you did?
Would you say the hospital, or?
Well, yeah.
I was in a hospital more than any other thing. I wasn't out trying to get well out of the hospital someplace.
At Cabana Tawan, for instance?
Yeah, like Cabana Tawan, and I worked the farm out there.
Tell us about working the farm. What you do?
Well, you'd have to go out there and pull weeds and cultivate different things that they're growing out there. Pardon?
What were you raising out there?
Oh, they had what they call commodities and mandawak, these roots and stuff. You eat makes bread and what have you, things like that. Different things to eat. But we never saw any of them. Japanese would take them all.
How much, did you have access to any black market food when you were in Cabana Tawan?
Oh yeah, we did. We could, we got stuff in the black market. We did in Bilibad too.
Did you always have to pay for it, or could you sometimes get it just from Filipinos?
No. You always had to pay for it.
And did you have any money?
If you worked, sometimes
So
the
you
Japanese
had a
would give you a little bit of money if you worked. But I never did work on a job where they ever paid me any that I know of.
So you weren't able to buy extra food?
No,
yourself?
all I could get is what I stole. But sometimes Filipinos would slip us in stuff, you know, in the black market, where the Japanese didn't know anything about. Get it that way, and they'd get messages into us and things like that.
Do you recall the religious services at Cabana Tawan?
Oh yes. About the only book we had was the Bible and Sundays. It's about the only study group that they had.
And they were permitted, the
Oh,
religious
yeah.
services.
And then at Cabana Tawan they had a little a group that did stage plays and things of this sort out there too for entertainment.
And you had a library? Did they have a library?
They had books, but it was hard to get a hold of. Very very seldom get a hold of those.
Do you remember any of the chaplains by name?
Not by name, no. Right offhand, I didn't recognize a few of them. Their names is brought up. Of course, my memory isn't too good. But the one thing I will say that some of the Americans was hard on the Americans too. One of them, Colonel Beecher, the one that run the Manitowan. When the fighting was on Bataan, the 4th Marines come down from Shanghai, China, just shortly before that, and they landed on Bataan, the 4th Marine Battalion. And we all figured, oh boy, here's the Marines, we get reinforcements. Next day they went over to Craigidor and went in the tunnel. We never seen them in the rest of the war. But anyhow, this Colonel Beecher, Marines take care of Marines. And that's how this all come about. Colonel Beecher run Cabanatuan, and all the death details and everything, Army boys went out on, the Air Force boys. The Marines all stayed right there at Cabanatuan because he'd taken care of their own, you know. And I hate to say it, but this was the truth. I don't see how Americans can treat another American like that. I haven't understood that since then. I never will. Of course, I've seen General Beecher after I got back too. The fact is, he was out in Oregon when I was out there, wasn't he, Jenny? At the same town I was in Roseburg, Oregon. He was in the rest home out there. They had him in the rest home. But I never was very proud of him, I'll tell you for sure, on that account, because I know there's a lot of boys died on his account. Maybe not on his account, it's a Japanese account really, but the fact is that he'd sent them right back out instead of the Marines.
Wasn't there quite a controversy about whether officers would work and that they were made forced to work as time went on?
Yeah, there was, and they sent all the officers out to a camp all by themselves, and I don't know what happened to them. Oh, wait a minute, not all of them. That's right, they had a lot of them at Cabanatuan too, but they was in a compound by themselves. Yeah, separate compounds, so we didn't get to know much about that. But they did, this Colonel Beecher did, he did he did have full command of the Americans at Manitowan, and you know, he had control. He didn't have control of the Japanese, but he had control of the Americans. And, he had to say who was to go on these different ships and stuff that left there. And as you know, some of those ships was pretty rough too.
I believe Beecher was on that last ship out.
He might have been. But there wasn't too much of that, though. The fact is, I wouldn't hold anything against Colonel Beecher over it either, as far as that goes, because he had it rough too, and I know that. And there's good Marines too, I know that also. So I just threw that in because there was quite a bit of dissension among the boys after they got back over.
Were there any Americans that you knew were working with the Japanese?
Pardon?
Were there any Americans that you knew that were working with the Japanese?
No, I don't see how they could. They might have worked with the Japanese to further their own ends, to further the own ends of their group or something like that, to accomplish a purpose for themselves. But I don't know of anybody you could call a traitor or anything like that. No.
How did you get the food from the black market? If you could buy the food, how did you actually get the food from the black market?
By paying off a Japanese or a Filipino.
So you had to pay off someone.
The Japanese didn't know anything about.
And how much would you have to pay?
Oh, about double the amount to Filipino probably. But the Japanese, you'd have to come up with something he wanted.
Which would be?
Like medicine. Number one, medicine. Of course, there wasn't any hardly left. But Oh, soft as asshole tablet, a little white tablet with a W on one side and a cross on the other. Why, you could just name your own price. It's antibiotic, you know. $1,000.
What was your food in the prisons, the prison camp?
Well, bad. It's consistent. It was always bad.
I
But,
mean, was it mainly rice or what?
Well, to start with, we had rice and seaweed. But don't laugh about seaweed. I found out things about that since it's got its points. But green slimy seaweed, it's not very appetizing. But it does have a lot of vitamins and things that people don't realize what it does have, really. And about once every, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, you get a little bit of meat. Short,
What kind?
once in a while. Sometimes caribou, they'd kill. And, of course, we ate all the dogs and cats. You wouldn't see nothing like that around. In the morning we'd have lugao, what they call lugao is a thin soup made out of rice, a lot of water in it. You get some brown sugar. Of course, they had sugar cane in the Philippines, lots of that old sugar cane, you know, rough kind of sugar. You could dope it up a little bit, if you could get the sugar in there. And that's in the morning. And in the afternoon, you get maybe a rice ball. Sometimes fish heads and rice. And two meals a day, really. And there was 180 grams of cereal a day. That'd about fill a glass. You know, that was a ration for the day that I
What
can
kind of
remember.
cereal?
Rice.
Rice.
You'd had to cook it yourself. Of course, that was the ration for the whole day. And the last year and a half in Bilibad, we never got any rice. All we got is raw field corn. And that, you had to cook it yourself, and the only thing you could do is take the hulls off it, make hominy out of it, or put it in ashes. Take the hulls off of it. But it had one effect. Field corn is bad for you. It was real bad for you if you don't have something with it, because it causes pellagra. And that pellagra is a deadly disease, you know. And the fact is, they haven't had any in this country for years and years and years, 50, 100 years maybe. For that reason, they found out what was doing it, and they made allowances for it through the grocery stores and everything. But corn will do that to you. It affects your liver or something. You'll turn yellow, just as yellow as your skin will just all peel off.
Where was Bilibad Prison?
Pardon?
Where was Bilibad Prison?
Right in the center of Manila.
Where was Cabanatuan?
Cabanatuan was in 100 miles north and northeast of Manila.
How'd you travel between the different camps?
There's a railroad between Manila and Cabanatuan.
You went by train?
Yeah. But there you had to hike about, after you got to the station, you had to walk about 6-7 miles to the camp from the station. Cabanatuan. Now, Camp O'Donnell was situated the same way, only it was over on the west side of the central part of Luzon. It's about the same distance away from Manila, but it was up from San Fernando, another town, see, and it was about 8 or 10 miles away from the railroad, too.
Were you receiving any news about how the war was going in the camps?
Yes. Always knew when it was going good and when it was going bad for us.
How?
When it was going good for our side, we got holy hell from the Japanese. Boy, they just beat the living daylights out of us. I remember when Jimmy Doolittle bought in Tokyo? That was the worst day I ever had in my life.
What happened?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I took so many beatings I didn't know what hit was on.
What did they beat you with?
Clubs.
What were the clubs made of?
Well, bamboo,
Bamboo?
what have you. They'd stand us for hours out in the sun. Go up and down the line and beat on you. And that was one of the worst days I ever had in my life. When that Doolittle raid on Tokyo was in April of 41, 42, I guess it was, 1942. By the way, I was in Camp O'Donnell when that took place. And shortly before I checked out and went down there on that detail pulling those trucks out of Bataan. And that's how we knew when things were going good or bad.
Whenever the
When
Americans
it was going good for the Japanese, boy, they was all smiles then.
Whenever the Americans were invading the Philippines again.
Pardon?
You know when the Americans invaded the Philippines
Yeah.
again. Did you know that?
Oh yeah, yeah. We seen that.
How were you aware of the Americans landing?
The planes, our planes is the main indication that we had, boy. First the Navy planes, we seen the Navy planes, we knew these coming off carriers.
How did the Japanese treat you then?
They treated us rough when they was coming in. Till the last few days. Till after they landed in Luzon, and then they let up.
Where were you at this time?
Bilibad. I was in Bilibad Prison. That's where I was released at. That's where that picture I showed you was taken at.
Was Bilibad released by the Flying Column of the First Cav?
Yeah, it was released by the 1st Cavalry Division and 36th Infantry, 36th Infantry Division, Ohio National Guard.
You familiar with the Flying Column?
Yeah. No, that was Cabanatuan, that flying column. I'm pretty sure. No, it was Bilibad. Bilibad, yeah, Santa Tomas.
Yeah.
Santa Tomas Prison, that's right. It was 1st Cavalry Division.
Did you know the Americans were approaching?
Yeah.
How'd you know?
Yeah. We could see well, we knew that it was fighting. We could hear the big guns, and not only that, but we could see the smoke going up, and the planes coming over.
What about the Japanese guards? What would they do?
And the Japanese guards began to thin out and begin to desert us. Of course, somebody stick their head out of the front gate there in the Bilibad. Boy, somebody shooting at them right now. So we stayed pretty close in that compound. We figured it'd be a pretty good idea. But the last 2 days, 1 or 2 days, the Japanese were all gone. Bilibad.
When you see
Gone completely.
When did you see your first American?
February 6, 1945.
Tell me about that day. What happened?
We heard the fight, and then all day long our planes was coming over, bombing and strafing in Manila. And long about noon, the front gate went down, and I think about an hour later, a Sherman tank comes through the wall.
What was your reaction when you saw it?
Great.
What'd you do?
I couldn't really see, but I was a happy boy. This tank came through the wall, 36th, I think it was tank 36th Infantry. And long about that time in the evening, we started getting mortar shells in there. I was on a stretcher at the time, and I know that. We had some of that corn, by the way, when they come in. We was eating dinner. And I remember some of the boys come and slapped it right out of our hands. They wouldn't let us eat it. But they picked up my stretcher and they moved everybody that was left in Bilibad over to Santa Tomas because Bilibad was taking artillery shells and mortar. Japanese were going to wipe it out. And we wasn't in Santa Tomas University. That's where they kept all the American civilian prisoners. Wasn't in there very long until the mortar shells started coming in that place. And
Then what you do when they started shelling Santa Tomas?
then I was there about 3 or 4 days, I think it was. I beginning to get the feeling better. I was just about completely blind at that time. I couldn't see. And I couldn't walk when I first went in there. I finally got where I could hobble around a little. They took us out to an evacuation hospital. And I think 1st Cavalry's out there. This evacuation hospital moved in the 1st Cavalry Division.
Where was it? Do you know?
It's north side of Manila. And I was in there for about 4 or 5 days, and they flew us by C-47 to Leyte, down to Leyte. And I was in the hospital down there. And I was there for a week and a half. And they put me on a hospital ship. It was just offshore off of Leyte there. And that's when I started the long trip back.
Did you go through Manila on the way to Leyte?
I was in Manila. No, I was in Manila when I went to Leyte.
What did Manila look like after you were released?
Oh, it was a fire.
You said you went
Boy,
down.
smoke and fire and fighting going on yet too. Well, it's hotly contested. I remember the post office, especially boys coming in and telling us about the Americans went in the ground floor of the post office in Manila, and it's about 6 stories high, 6 or 7 stories high, and they drove the Japanese up the roof. Japanese counterattacked and drove them clearing out. The Americans clearing out again. They fought back and forth over that thing for 4 or 5 days before the Americans finally secured it. And I believe it was the 1st Cavalry Division that finally secured it. And that's the part that I remember about that.
So from Leyte you came back to the States?
Leyte, I come back.
What ship you come back on?
I don't even remember the name of it, to tell you the truth.
And you came back to where?
To Honolulu and finally in the Golden Gate.
And the first time you set foot in the States, what'd you do?
I don't remember. I was so happy. I remember this when my cousin, she was city editor for the San Francisco Chronicle, come down to meet the boat. She knew that I was on it. She was my cousin. And I remember they gave us all a letter from President Roosevelt, and I remember that real good because I got that letter the day he died, and I believe that's about the last time he ever signed his name. And that's it right over there.
Yeah. Did your parents know that you were a prisoner?
Yes. They knew I was missing in action, MIA, for about 2 years, year and a half. I got the account of it right down here.
Now, did the Japanese give a list of who was prisoners then? Or what?
No, what happened, the Japanese let us, for propaganda reasons, let us in on a shortwave broadcast from downtown Manila to the United States. And the Red Cross picked up the shortwave broadcast in the United States here, and and my name was mentioned on it. And of course, they let me say something to my folks, and that was in that little piece of paper I was going to show you there. And they, of course, that's the first that my mother and dad knew that I was a prisoner of war, and then that was in 1943, the last part of 1943.
So from late 41 to 43, they didn't know if you were alive or dead.
They didn't know if I was alive or dead then. But
Would you just give us your reflections on your whole episode as a POW?
the things that's happened to me since, or
Well, just whatever you would reflect back on it, think about it, just your overall view of it.
it's something I never want to go through again. But I'm glad it turned out the way it did because we won. That's my reflection on it, and it's tough.
Well,
It's tough, but the Americans won. That was good enough for me.
Mr. Anderson, I want to thank you